I'd like to introduce Jean Durham, the wife of our speaker. Jean, would you stand, please? Thank you for being here, Jean. Several weeks ago, when it came time for me to put together the introduction of our guest, I decided I'd call Roy Williams and asked Roy if he would come to Rocky Mount from Chapelville and introduce Woody Durham. And he said, "Woody who?" So I said, "Well, if he's not going to do it, I'm going to talk to Butch Davis." So I called the football office, and the lady who answered the telephone said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have anybody here by that name." I hope that's not my phone. It is. Cut it off, Don. There you go. I said, "Well, we're talking to football office." I said, "Don't you have a football coach?" He said, "Yeah." "Well, let me speak to him." So Everett Withers came on the phone, and I said, "Coach, how about coming to Rocky Mount and introduce Woody Durham at the Kiwanis Club meeting in September?" He said, "I don't know Woody Durham." I said, "My gosh, you don't know Woody Durham? He spent 40 years being the voice of the Tar Heels, bringing all across the state and up and down the eastern seaboard, play-by-play of Carolina football and basketball." He said, "Well, we got a guy named Jones Angel who's doing that. If you want me to come to Rocky Mount and introduce Jones Angel, I'd be glad to do that." Woody, all kidding aside, it is time for you to be blindfolded. But what we have decided to do is not blindfold you today, and I'm going to try to introduce you myself. And I chose this moment. I chose this moment and this method to say some things that I think I want to say to my friends in the audience, and I want to say to you as Jean in your presence. I don't know anybody who does anything any better than you do what you have done for 40 years. This here's the word. Jean and I had an email exchange shortly after you retired, and she said, "I can't believe how overwhelmed we have been with notes, telephone calls, email messages, tweets, even smoke signals." I said, "Jean, you need to fully understand that you're part of the family, and that Woody Durham is a household word from Florida to Massachusetts. And I would be disappointed if you weren't overwhelmed with all sorts of messages." I want to tell you about a guy, a friend of mine that I'm sure many of you know. His name's Bob Lane. He has an appliance repair business. And Bob Lane is as dedicated an NC State fan as Don Stalin is a UNC fan. And Bob told me that much of what I've said to you, that you're the very best he's ever heard. And when he wants to listen to an NC State UNC football or basketball game, he doesn't go to the NC State network. He goes to the Woody-O network. Woody, the thing that we've always cherished about you is saying, as you introduced, that you may not tell it like it is, but you tell it like we like to hear it. I'm going to reverse that today and say you may not tell it like we like it, but you tell it like it is. Come on up here, Woody!
Jim, thanks very much for that introduction. And it's nice to be back at Rocky Mount. One of my concerns when I retired from the network booth back in mid-April was the fact that I might not get to come to Rocky Mount anymore. And since I have retired, I realize this might well be my last visit with you people in August, just before the football season starts. But to be quite honest with you, I'm delighted to be here today. After all, I needed another birdhouse. No, seriously, this has been a real treat, and when I come here every year, I always tell you that when I get to Rocky Mount, I know that football is ready to begin. And sure enough, tonight, there are going to be 14 college football games played across the country tonight, and 2 of them will involve ACC teams. Wake Forest is going to be up in the Carrier Dome against Syracuse, and Georgia Tech will be at home against Western Carolina. That'll be a rather interesting game because that's Paul Johnson's alma mater. But Paul Johnson never played football at Western Carolina. Paul Johnson never played college football and is one of the most successful coaches in the country. So it just goes to prove that you don't have experience to sometimes do what you do best. Politics mentioned a moment ago. And one of the interesting things when you have a job like mine, or had a job like mine, and you retire, then you do hear from a lot of people. And I had the good fortune to live in Greensboro for about 6 years, and I knew her father-in-law much better than I knew her. I'm talking about our United States Senator Kay Hagan. Well, at the ACC tournament this year, I had not seen the senator in a good while, and I didn't expect to see her at the tournament. But North Carolina plays that first close game against either Clemson or Miami, I can't remember now, I think it was Clemson, on Friday afternoon, and I get up at the end of the game and I'm starting off for a second to kind of catch myself until we come back, and I sit there and Jones gets ready to do the next game. All of a sudden I hear this lady coming down the aisle. Woody, what's wrong? I look up and it's a United States Senator running to catch up with me. I turned and saw her and I said, Kay, it's good to... Woody, that game was too close. I didn't think I was going to make it through it. Well, I got her calmed down a little bit and everything. But the day I retired, that afternoon, a Wednesday afternoon, I was in my office at home getting ready for a Rams Club meeting that night in Raleigh. And the telephone rings, and in my office, my television set will show the phone number sometimes on the upper left-hand corner of the picture. But I see a telephone number that I don't quite recognize. And I pick up the phone anyway and say, hello. Woody, what have you done? You have retired. Woody, we won't be able to get through the games tonight. I said, Senator, it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. Well, we had a very nice conversation. But she's a terrific lady and doing a good job. Well, the next morning, about 10 o'clock, I was in the office working. Telephone rings, another number on the screen. I don't recognize that number either. I pick up the phone, voice on the other end. I says, hello. Says, is this Mr. Durham? I said, yes, it is. He said, this is State Trooper Bill Jones with the North Carolina Highway Patrol. Well, our son, our youngest son at that time, was commuting between Winston-Salem and Burlington to a new job he has over with Elon. He's with IMG College out of Winston-Salem, and he was eventually moving over there, which he's done. Well, he's on I-40 at this particular time about every morning. And we've had a couple of friends that got calls like this, and they weren't very good telephone calls. And I didn't say anything for a second, and I said, yes, what is it? He said, have you got 5 minutes for the governor? And I've known Beverly and Bob when she was lieutenant governor, and they lived in Chapel Hill at the Chapel Hill Country Club area. So we get on the telephone and we talk for a good while. And she's about to hang up the telephone, and I said, well, Governor, I said, thank you very much for calling. I said, it's certainly been nice. Yesterday, Senator Hagan, this morning you, but I doubt that I hear from Senator Byrd. And Beverly said, well, why is that? I said, because he played football at Wake Forest. But the senator 2 weeks later sent me a nice letter. Again, it's fun to be with you. It's fun to talk football. We'll look briefly at the 12 teams, and I'll tell you what what I know about them, and I can't get away from it because maybe not knowing as much as I have in the past about these teams, I still know a little bit about them. And so we'll have some fun here for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. And we still have about the same get-out time, don't we, Jim? Okay, I may be through before then, but we still have the same get-out time. When you start off talking about ACC football this year, of course, you got to start with Virginia Tech and Florida State. And the reason for that is pretty familiar because they hold at least a share of 16 of the last official 18 ACC football championships. Those two schools have won 16 or shared all but 2 of the last 18 football championships in the ACC. And most of the speculation right now also centers on the Seminoles and the Hokies as far as this coming season is concerned. I found a consensus poll last night. They put the AP, the ESPN, all of them together, and then they average them out at the end. And Florida State is picked as number 5 in the country as this season begins, and Virginia Tech number 10. As a matter of fact, one poll picked Florida State number 1 in the country, but they were, in another poll, they were as low as 10. Virginia Tech ranged from 5 to 17 in being a consensus choice of number 10. Well, of course, Jimbo Fisher won the Atlantic Coast Conference, or the Atlantic Division, rather, in his first season as the permanent head coach at Florida State. He's got 8 returning starters in Tallahassee on both sides of the ball. Frank Beamer up at Blacksburg at Virginia Tech is starting his 25th season. He's got 12 returning starters. 12. But only 5 of them are on defense. So Bud Foster, who is one of the foremost defensive coordinators in the country, is really going to have to get that defense to regain its swagger. While the offense, they haven't changed coordinators, but Michael Cain, many of you remember him, the former NC State head coach in Raleigh. Michael Cain is the quarterback coach at Virginia Tech, and he's now going to start calling the plays. That's very unusual because most of the time that's left to the offensive coordinator. And Coach Beamer says that we've always been a team that likes to throw it and run it, and then let the defense dictate what we try to do. Well, he's certainly got a favorable schedule. In addition to Clemson from the Atlantic Division, they play Miami, Georgia Tech, and Carolina all in Blacksburg this year. So that'll be a tough go. Coach Fisher thought his Seminoles had a physical camp back in the spring, but he felt like it was difficult to judge his offense because he had so many people that he was trying to work into the lineup. He does believe that they're extremely talented on defense, and it's been very few years that Florida State has not been talented on defense. But as he thinks, as a matter of fact, you hear very few coaches say this, and he made this statement. He doesn't have any concerns about a particular area of Florida State's play going into the season. The first 3 home games include, they're at home for their first 3 games. They include Oklahoma, and then of course comes games on the road at Clemson, Wake Forest, and Duke. And 4 of the last 6 will be played at home against NC State and Miami, being 2 of them. So those are 2 of the contenders. Now, most ACC coaches agree that the league is improving, and Clemson and NC State, I think, are part of that improvement. They are likely to challenge Florida State in the Atlantic Division. A year ago, the Tigers lost 4 of their last 6 games, finished 6-7, the first losing season down at Death Valley in 12 years, but 14 starters are back, including 9 on offense. And Dabo Swinney has implemented a new offensive system. He brought in a brand new offensive coordinator from Tulsa. He said it'll be a little unique, but it'll be more hurry up with a no-huddle scheme. It'd be hard to imagine Clemson coming out with a no-huddle attack. I felt that we had the personnel here with the incoming recruits to really fit this system. He thinks they've had good focus in preparation. They were in the top 25 in one of the preseason polls. They'll be at home this year against Auburn and Florida State, and they're at Virginia Tech, and all 3 of those games are in the first 5 that Clemson will play this year. So we'll know whether Dabo's going to have a job in December or not after those first 5 games are played. NC State's got 13 returning starters, including 8 on defense. However, one of the 5 offensive returnees will not be Russell Wilson. I think everybody knows that. He transferred to Wisconsin, and Wisconsin will play tonight against UNLV in Madison, and Russell Wilson will be the starting quarterback for the Badgers. Mike Glennon, a junior, a redshirt junior, had already been handed the offensive reins by Tom O'Brien. Tom O'Brien said this: Mike Glennon is ready to take control of this offense, and he's as talented as any of the guys I've ever had. He means some of the guys he had at Boston College. Of all of the guys at Boston College, he's got as much or more talent as all of them. He just needs the opportunity to play this fall, and now he's going to get that opportunity. Glennon is capable of making any throw. He's got pocket presence, and he's got confidence in his ability. As far as the NC State schedule is concerned, they go to Florida State, and they entertain Clemson in their last 5 games. Boston College won 5 of its last 6 games, finished 7-6 last year. They've got 14 returning starters and had a very, very productive spring. They've also got a new offensive coordinator in Kevin Rogers, but Frank Spaziani, the head coach, doesn't think the scheme will be that much different for his Eagles. We're not going to the spread or the wishbone, he admitted, and there are not that many new plays in college football. The one thing that has hurt Boston College during the preseason and will likely hurt Boston College is the fact that Montel Harris, a preseason All-ACC running back who had 3,600 yards and was the #1 rusher in the ACC through his first 3 seasons as a junior, and he's had his second knee operation in the last 9 months. And if he returns to Boston College, it will be interesting. Maryland's Randy Edsall is one of 2 new head coaches in the ACC. Now let's make it 3. And he moves to College Park after winning the Big East at Connecticut and taking the Huskies to the Fiesta Bowl. He used the spring to install a new system. The Terrapins were 9-4 in 2010 last year and have 14 returning starters. But Edsall and his staff have moved a lot of people around. That was an interesting situation. Ralph Friedgen goes 9-4 last year, put Maryland in the bowl game, had a coach in waiting. Several schools now, they're hiring the head coach's replacement, letting him work a couple of years as an assistant coach. Jamie Franklin is the guy. Jamie Franklin, right after the season is over, takes the head coaching job at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee. There's a new AD succeeding Debbie Yao, who moved to NC State at the University of Maryland. Jamie Franklin leaves. There's no longer a coach in waiting on the staff, so the new athletic director fired Ralph Friedgen as the head coach. So that shows you how crazy this sport can be sometimes. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Jim Grove is in his 11th year at Wake Forest. And you talk about coaching tenure, Jim Grove is the 9th leading head coach in the country as far as terms of current service are concerned. Only 8 other coaches in this entire country have been at their respective schools longer than Jim Grove has. And he's only been there 9 years at Wake Forest. 11 years, excuse me. He's number 9 on that list. Wake Forest won its last league game at Vanderbilt last year. They snapped a 9-game losing streak. And Jim Grove said he thought the Deacons had the satisfaction of hard work last fall really pay off down the stretch. Now, I also saw something interesting this morning. Maybe you did the same thing. He's very upset about the complacency of his team and of his coaching staff. And they open tonight in the Carrier Dome against Syracuse, so we'll be interested to see what happens there. As far as the Coastal Division is concerned, it shapes up as probably the most competitive because not only do you have Virginia Tech in that division, you've also got Miami and Carolina. They appear to be the strongest challenges, at least they did a week ago. But both have got to play the Hokies in Lane Stadium, so that will be interesting. Miami has a new head coach in Al Golden. He was a former assistant at Virginia. He's been the head coach at Temple. And can you just imagine the situation he's walked into at the University of Miami? But we'll talk more about that later, and I'm sure you're going to have some questions about it, because they're saying now that things involving some of the players there, after you read all of that, it looks like now that some of those players, a few of them anyway, are only going to have to sit out one game. The team last year lost its last 3 games and did have 14 returning starters before all of the adversity hit that program. And he said that we've got to get back to being a good football team so we can eliminate the things, penalties and turnovers, which cause you to lose. We've got to make good decisions in the community and not have any distractions academically. They must not have been listening when he talked about that. Said those are the 4 things that you can control. 5 of those players caught up in that Nevin Shapiro mess down there have been reinstated, because early investigation proved that those players were not involved, as the report said. 7 others have to serve a game or multiple games of suspension. But I think right now Miami is trying to position itself to have the NCAA not be as strict with them. It'll be interesting as to how Georgia Tech responds. They had an NCAA penalty last month. The program lost its 2009 ACC championship, but Paul Johnson made this year's team quickly aware of its position. Life isn't fair, he told his players. You learn from things, and the NCAA action doesn't affect this team from going forward. There is no postseason ban, no scholarship limitations, and no loss of anything. He's got a pretty young team at Georgia Tech this year, more experience on defense than offense, and he's been encouraged by what he's seen in the preseason. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tonight and what happens in the early going. David Cutcliffe over at Duke, 4th year with the Blue Devils. He has an overall mark of 12 and 24. He is the ultimate optimist. David Cutcliffe says, I think we'll be a little more athletic and a more talented team, although 2/3 of the squad will still be freshmen and sophomores. We've got to raise the confidence level and go win games in the 4th quarter. At Virginia, losses in the last 4 games left Virginia 4-8. Mike London's first year, former Virginia assistant. This year he's got 18 returning starters in Charlottesville with 10 on defense. We've got to improve defensively, he said, but we have made great strides offensively, and we have the same kicking combination back. I saved Carolina rather than an order of how they might compete in their respective divisions. I saved Carolina till last in my comments because I thought when we open it up for question, I feel sure that's going to generate a lot of your questions, and I'm not sure that I can answer very many of them or any of them, but we'll see. But I thought the 8-5 season, somebody came up to me after my retirement from the network and said, after all the basketball players said they were coming back, said, well, Woody, aren't you disappointed that you didn't go one more year because of the basketball team? I said, listen, both the football and basketball teams last year had great seasons. Look at what the football team did in the face of all of that adversity caused by 3 players that were just selfish. There's no other way to explain what those guys did, and they were just selfish. And then, when they were interviewed, they were told before they went into the NCAA interviews, don't lie. And they did. And if you lie to an NCAA investigator, they will nail your hide to that wall right over there. Unless you tell them something, unless you answer the questions truthfully. And I thought the way that football team came back and played last year, and then to win a football game with one of the weirdest finishes I have ever seen in a football game was something. And then the job that Roy did with the basketball team in the winter, he had personnel leaving that team. One decided he would go during the season after probably playing the 4 best games of his career. And for Roy to put that together and then come within 1 game of taking that group of young men to the Final Four, I can understand the reason that most of them wanted to come back, because they've really got some talent, and apparently in McAdoo and Harrison and the guys coming into that program, they're going to be well set. But I've been impressed with the way that Everett Withers has handled himself since he was appointed the head coach. There is no doubt that Everett's defense, as the defensive coordinator, has been the best units on the field for North Carolina the last 2 years. The offense began to show some consistency last year, finally, because T.J. Yates had the best season I've ever seen the senior quarterback have at Carolina. And if he doesn't spike that ball with a second left on the clock out in Nashville in the Music City Bowl, Carolina's not going to win that game. He and Steve Newman won that game. And you're going to probably say, who in the world is Steve Newman? Steve Newman was a technical advisor in the booth. And Steve Newman was a former well-honored official from the Big Ten, and that was a Big Ten crew working. If you're watching television, listening on the radio, you heard the game officials say, George Lafitte, George said, this game is over. Well, the crew starts off the field. Butch Davis said, out on the field shaking hands with Derek Dooley. And the guy holding the headset on the sideline, when they come over and put the headset on, and the technical advisor wants to review a play, guy goes out there and he's calling the crew over there. He says, boys, the game's not over. And he handed the headset to the official, and Steve Newman said, he spiked that ball with 1 second left. There's 1 second left to play. And everybody thought there was going to be a illegal participation penalty on Carolina, because the field goal team was basically out on the field, you know, when the ball got spiked. The penalty was for illegal substitution, 5 yards rather than 15 yards for illegal participation. It allowed Casey Bart to kick the field goal that sent the game into the first of 2 overtimes, which Carolina eventually won. I've never seen one finish like that, but thank goodness I was looking at that clock when TJ spiked the ball. And TJ left Carolina with 40 records to his credit. Hard to believe that young man got booed when he appeared on the video board during his junior year during the basketball season. But anyway, and he got drafted by the Houston Texans as well. But I've been impressed with the way Everett has handled all of this. The staff is still intact. The players seem to be unified. The staff seems to be unified. And this was going to be a good football team. And there's no reason why it can't. And I think one of the best things that helps this football team is that they play their first 3 home games at home. Saturday against James Madison. The following Saturday against Rutgers. Rutgers has got a game, I think, tonight. And then, of course, will come Virginia before they go on the road to Georgia Tech and East Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The offense has not gotten very much attention. The defense has, because of the returning personnel there. But you'll enjoy, if you follow the Tar Heels, you will enjoy watching Bryn Renner at quarterback. He learned a lot playing behind TJ last year. He's a very talented young man. He can throw the football. Outstanding passer, and if and when it breaks down around him, he's got the speed to get out of there. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. As I said, I think the 3 straight home games will help. They've also got Miami at home later in the season. They go on the road to Georgia Tech, Clemson, NC State, and Virginia Tech. So that'll be pretty tough.
I'm going to surprise Woody with another birdhouse. We'll wait until after I ring the bell.